Question 2. So we've just done pre-engagement. Now I'm looking at the quality risks in the firm's acceptance of client relationships. So it's no longer the actioning of the steps that the partner should consider when deciding to accept an engagement or not. It's what should have been stipulated in the firm's policy or then the firm's settings of standards for pre-engagement, and by default, seeing what they are doing, the policy is obviously wrong, or the standards or the process is obviously wrong because the actions are so wrong from question 1. Once again, if you weren't sure that this is what you should have considered, I expect at a CTA level that you know when they ask about the firm's system of quality management, you need to go to ISQM 1. And then when in ISQM 1, you will find the acceptance of client relationships part of the system of quality management, and there you can start to compare what they should have in their policy to how they are actioning it in the question to note that their policy or system is wrong, or there are risks in their policy or system. Okay, let's go to ISQM 1. So I come into ISQM 1, starting at my contents page, which is flagged, look down at my requirements that has been highlighted, and there I've got acceptance and continuance of client relationships and specific engagements highlighted. In addition, I've got the application paragraphs for that highlighted. So I'll start off by going to the requirement paragraph. But if I don't find what I need to, I'll go to the application paragraphs. Okay, so let's go to paragraph 30. Paragraph 30, acceptance and continuance of client relationships and specific engagements, says the firm shall establish the quality objectives that address the acceptance and continuance of client relationships and specific engagements by looking at the integrity and the ethical values of the client, the firm's ability to perform the engagements in accordance with professional standards and applicable legal and regulatory requirements. Okay, we're looking at the integrity and the ethical values of the client, so we're going to A67. A67, acceptance and continuance of client relationships and specific engagements. If I go down just a little bit, I can see examples of factors that you have to consider that indicate whether the integrity and ethical values of the client are acceptable. So, the nature of the entity, including its complexity of its ownership, the nature of the client's operations, the attitude of the principal owners, and any aggressive interpretation of accounting standards. If they are aggressively concerned with maintaining the fee as low as possible, if they are limiting the scope, if there are indications of money laundering or criminal activities, what is the reason for the new appointment and not reappointing the previous firm, business reputation of related parties. These are the ethical considerations. So in the scenario, if there are any indications that any of these are applicable, we can then go and say there is a concern with the client's integrity. If I continue down, it then says the firm's ability to perform the engagement, so the availability of the appropriate resources, the access to the persons, and whether they can comply with the relevant ethical requirements. So, what are the factors to consider? The reporting deadline, in terms of is there sufficient time? The availability of the individuals who are competent and capable. Who are they? So individuals who are able to direct and supervise. Individuals with knowledge of the relevant industry or regulatory or reporting requirements. Individuals to perform the group audit or the audits of the components of the group, the subsidiaries, the associates, whatever. The availability of experts, and also if the budget allows for this. If there is an engagement quality review required, if there is an individual assigned to do that. The need for technical resources if the company has an IT system. And then the intellectual resources if the company has an IT system. So these are the things that we have to go into the scenario to see if any of these are applicable to help us to determine whether the firm should be accepting an engagement based on what their policies and procedures are with regard to the objective of acceptance and continuance. Okay, so let's go to the scenario. And so guys, as we go through the scenario, we are going to pick up the same issues as we picked up in the first one. And we're going to address each of those under the policy. Okay, so you are going to have to discuss the scope limitation on management integrity. You're going to have to discuss whether they've got sufficient staff because the previous auditors resigned as a result of insufficient staff. There's no discussion in the policy about a vacancy, so you wouldn't have to address that from a business perspective. The policy also doesn't address an engagement letter, so you don't have to address that from a business perspective. The policy also doesn't address a fee, so you don't have to discuss that. That's a business factor. But the policy does address whether there are sufficient staff based on the size. So I'm going to have to add that. And whether we have the capacity and the capability to deal with an IT system, experts. So that's there. Whether there's practical experience, that needs to be addressed because it's the first client. Whether they have experience because they are juniors, that needs to be addressed. The client integrity, if they are trying to reduce the fee or pay the lowest fee aggressively, that will need to be addressed. Any threats to the ethical principles, professional competence and due care if they do not have the budget to have the necessary staff required. The partner being a company secretary, non-compliance with the Code of Professional Conduct, the ethical requirements, the policy should address that, and if the partner is doing this, the policy is lacking. Sufficient time. Okay, so guys, all the issues that we picked up in the first round now indicate weaknesses in the policy. Because if the policy had these clearly lined up or lined out, then the partner shouldn't be accepting an engagement when there are so many factors that disagree with the policy. So make it clear, I'm doing question 2 and I'm going to say the following weaknesses appear in the firm's policy for acceptance of audit engagements and I'm going to put down each of the headings as they were in ISQC1. You've got to look at the competence, capabilities, time, and resources. I'm going to leave half a page. I'm going to then discuss it under ethical requirements, and leave half a page, and client's integrity. And I'm going to start with the first one, the scope limitation, not allowing us to contact the previous auditors, thereby a concern with their policy with regards to management integrity. So there's a weakness in their policy around client integrity and ensuring that there are no scope limitations. The reason I can pick up that weakness is because Zbox was denied permission to contact the previous auditors and the engagement was still accepted. So I've said there's a weakness as a result of the following: client integrity, scope limitations appear to be missing from the policy because denying the auditors permission to contact previous auditors was acceptable. And it shouldn't be. It's a scope limitation, which could indicate that management's integrity is lacking. My second concern or weaknesses in the policy is whether they really have considered that sufficient staff must be engaged for an audit. And the reason why I can see that is because the previous auditors resigned because of insufficient staff, and 3 staff members are being assigned to this big engagement, and therefore it would appear that their policy on ensuring they've got sufficient staff is weak. So I'm going to say there's a concern with whether the policy addresses sufficient staff because only 3 members assigned to audit a client of 1,000 employees, and the previous auditors resigned due to insufficient staff. I'm just going to go and see where else we deal with insufficient so that we can cover it all at once. Okay, well, now we'll then go into the rest of our concerns with our staff. Being inexperienced because it's a first client of this nature, being inexperienced because they're junior, and then our budgeting issues. So there's going to be a concern with the capabilities of our resources or our staff, because they're all junior, so they'll be inexperienced with auditing IT systems and using CATs to do the audit. They are inexperienced in auditing clients in this industry because the first of this nature. And they have inexperience in the technical and legal and standards with regards to the client, because it's the first of its nature. And in addition to that, there is a reduced budget, therefore no manager, and therefore no experts if required. And you would assume there could be a need for an expert because of their IT system that was in-house developed. And then let's address time while we're here. So I've done each of those. I'll come back to 7, 8, and 9. I'll just quickly do time while we're here. Time assigned to each member for the work is very short, and the deadline is very short. So there's a concern with regards to time. So time allocated to complete the work is short, and the audit deadline within a month. Okay, next we're going to do our client integrity because of the low fee. So I'll say a concern with the aggressive attempt to keep the fee low could indicate that there isn't a fee consideration in the policy, and therefore you might not pick up a weakness in client's integrity. And that threat affects professional competence and due care, as well as the fact that they don't have managers on the engagements, only juniors, so they might not have the knowledge and therefore professional competence and due care. So there's a concern that the policy is lacking guidance on compliance with the ethical requirements because the partner is the company secretary, and therefore there is that self-interest and self-review threat to independence, and there is no manager or budget for a manager, and therefore there's going to be a threat to professional competence and due care. And I've addressed them all. Okay guys, let's go have a look at the solution. I just want to address that because there are some key points that come through from the Code of Professional Conduct that I didn't address here because we haven't done it yet. So I don't expect that to come out at you, but it's important that you see it because it is going to become relevant when we do the Code of Professional Conduct.